Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 ESSER Grant Info Session. It's nice to see all of you that could be here, and we are recording this session for those of you who couldn't make it or folks who want to, watch me do a PowerPoint over and over and over again. It's super exciting. Very important information that we'll share today. Today, I am going to share information about the second year of ICfL's ESSER grants options and talk a little bit about that. I have a PowerPoint I'm going to share. I'm going to go through a lot of information. I'm recording this, and we'll have the recording available probably sometime tomorrow, depending on how long we go and how much is involved. Sometimes those take a while to process before I have access to put it up on YouTube, and then you have to wait for YouTube to process it. Anyway, I hope by tomorrow sometime the recording will be available, as well as the PowerPoint that I'm going to share. So if you missed something or there was a detail you wanted for us to write down again, that will also all be shared out. So I'm going to go through my information, and then we'll have lots of time at the end for questions. I will try to monitor the chat as best I can, but sometimes because of the recording, it's hard to do all of that. Luckily, I have my friends Jeannie and Talayla here to help. Oh, I should probably introduce myself too. Jennifer Redford, Youth Services Consultant at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. Okay, so we will dive into the presentation. And if you do have a burning question, feel free to unmute. You can try to put it in the chat and I will try to grab it. If I don't, we will just catch all the questions afterwards. Let's talk about ESSER. Woo! Okay. So we're going to begin with some definitions. And I meant to say this kind of at the beginning, so I'm saying it now. This is a very similar presentation to what we did last year. And about halfway through, we'll talk about why this year's grants and support is a little different than last year's. So if you need to if you've already heard this, feel free to just zone out and I will wave you back in when it's time to talk about new stuff. Okay, let's talk about some definitions. ESSER stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. So Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. It's part of the American Rescue Plan, which is a federal law that was passed in 2021 to provide relief to states, including funding to help safely reopen and sustain safe operations of schools, and to address the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on students. So part of the ARP ESSER funds that each state received were set aside to support learning beyond the classroom in out-of-school time settings and for summer learning. So a lot of, you will hear a couple phrases quite often as the ICfL folks here talk about ESSER. One of the phrases you'll hear is OST, or out of school time. And these are just any type of program or services or support that serve learners outside of the traditional classroom setting. So for public libraries, that can be your after school programs, your summer programs, your school age and teen programs that you're usually doing. For school librarians, this often means lunchtime programs, passive programs for kids to do in between classes, after school and before school programs, extracurricular programs like the Idaho Battle of the Books or IBOB all fall into the out of school time bucket. And then we talk about summer learning, which you will sometimes see abbreviated to SL when it's related to ESSER. And those are programs and activities that support learners during the summer months when school is not in session. Why are libraries part of this landscape? We know that students spend 80% of their time outside of school, and libraries are uniquely poised to mitigate the impacts of lost school time and unfinished learning. Libraries are free and accessible to all members of the community. Many public libraries allow people who don't have library cards to also participate in programs. Unlike some other out-of-school time programs like Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA, which do offer scholarships, but there is sometimes a cost associated with them. Many libraries offer their programming for free, or a significantly reduced rate if they do need to charge for something. But when you think about how much time kids are spending outside of actual school time, there's a real opportunity for libraries to help fill in any types of learning gaps that aren't being addressed in the classroom through programs that offer opportunities to socialize, to build up social emotional learning skills, and also help kids develop their own interests. So in early 2022, the Idaho Commission for Libraries, the Idaho STEM Action Center, and the Idaho Out of School Network collaborated on a proposal with the Idaho State Board of Education to fulfill some of the out of school time and summer learning requirements of the ARP ESSER appropriation. So remember I said every state got a big pot of ARP ESSER funding, and a lot of that was directly going to school districts, but some of it needed to be set aside for out of school time and summer learning according to this federal statute. And so our three organizations went to the State Board of Education and we said, hey, we are really great at out of school time. Would you like to just give us the money to sub-grant out to out of school time organizations and really support their efforts? And that idea was accepted. So altogether, all three organizations received $6 million to help out of school time organizations to address unfinished learning due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Of that $6 million, $1.25 million was earmarked just for libraries through the ICfL. And that money is to be spent over 2 years. So we have been spending for 1 year, and we are entering year 2, and we need to have all of this funding spent by September 2024, so within the next year. This next slide is going to give you a very brief overview of what to expect from grants this year as part of the ESSER funding. And then I will go through each of the grants individually and give you more details. I'm going to check the chat before I go in. Oh, and Jeannie is thankful. Thank you. Jeannie is putting some links in the chat that are very helpful. Okay. So we will offer again 5 grants to support unfinished learning in OST, out of school time, and summer. For OST, we will have again a larger planning grant. This year, the maximum funding for that grant is up to $15,000. If you are a library who received that grant previously, you can apply for up to half of that amount, so $7,500. This grant is really a planning grant. So it's for library systems or school districts to engage in strategic planning to serve youth kind of on a larger scale. If you happen to be a library that is just kind of a solo public library, for example, Gooding received this grant last year, or Donnelly, they don't have branches, perfectly acceptable for them to use the funding to support all of the kids in their district. If you are a multi-branch public library system, you would need to use the funding to support learners at all of the branches. And if you are a school district, you would want to do something on more of a district-wide level. And then there is the smaller OST programming grant for up to $3,000, and individual library locations can apply for this one. And it's mostly to support programming. And really with $3,000, you can't do much more than just support your programs. But if you are in like a multi-branch system or a school district, you would want each individual library in the school district or system to apply for this grant individually. So if you were Prairie River Library District, and you've got several different locations up there. If they wanted the smaller grant, every location would need to apply for an individual grant. Similarly for school districts or for schools, each school library would apply for the grant. It's important to note that the application for this grant opens tomorrow. It will stay open through September 30th. So you should have a nice long chunk of time to kind of get those grant application materials together. The application isn't too bad, but we have a little bit less funding for grants this cycle than we did last cycle. So I expect these grants to be a little bit more competitive. So you will want to put forward your best grant application for consideration. Last year, we did fund everybody who requested funding. This year, we will run out of money if we do that, I anticipate.
Hey, Jen, we've got a couple of questions. Okay. So if the library and the school district in the same area are applying, if the library got a grant, can the school district still apply?
Yep, you can. Those can be two separate applications. Again, they would need to be very strong applications. There is a limited number of the $15,000 grants available. So, you know, put forth your best project proposal and we'll see how it shakes out. But, oh, good question, Sherry. You can apply for both, but we will not award you both. So if you want to apply for a bigger one and you're not sure if your application will be strong enough and you also apply for a smaller one, that's fine. If we end up not giving your library a larger one, we would most likely fund your smaller one. But if you get the larger one, we will not fund your smaller grant. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And we will go in depth on the kind of requirements for each of these grants in a moment too. So summer learning, we have 3 grants available. The first one is called Summer Strategies, and this is quite a big grant, $20,000, up to $20,000, to support summer programs and best practices for summer learning. We'll go kind of more into what that means in just a moment, but this is the larger, more kind of strategic summer grant. This one that will open for applications on September 20th. So you have a little while to plan for that one. We also have the Summer Support Grant. Again, this is a $2,000 grant, mostly to just enhance what you're already doing for summer. So extra programming, bring in fancier presenters, do a little bit more with your summer support. This one will be open from October 15th to November 15th. And then we also are offering, once again, the Summer School Libraries Grant. And this is up to $7,000 to keep school libraries open during the summer months. And open is a very vague term. There's lots of ways to keep your library open, and we're open to what that looks like. But the important thing to know about this grant is that close to 250,000 Idahoans are not currently served by a public library. They don't live in a public library district or a city that has a public library. The closest library for many of those Idahoans is the school library. And we're very concerned about making sure that all students in Idaho have access to library services during the summer months. The school library grant, the summer school library grant, helps us address the need of those students who, because of transportation barriers, we live in a rural state, it's hard to get to the library. Whatever the reason is, the school library is the best option for access to books during the summer months. So that one is also open from October 15th to November 15th. Okay. I just want to go over kind of for all of the grants, okay, too many clicks. Here we go. Okay. What to expect for the grants, allowable expenses. So things you can do with the grant funding. You can pay salaries and wages. So if you want to bring in an intern, or you have a part-timer who you can temporarily bump up their hours for programming purposes, you can use the grant funds for that. Program supplies and materials. You all are really great at doing programs and sourcing your supplies, and you can use the grant funding for all your program supplies. PPE, of course, ways to keep your community safe throughout the cold and flu season. Equipment for learning. So equipment is kind of a nebulous term, but if you need something that's not a consumable, but it's under $5,000. So let's say you want to do support some tutoring sessions in your library weekly, but you don't have like a really good like desk space or something to support the tutoring, or something like that. Like you have this great idea to use tablets to interact with the kids in a way that helps them develop their STEM skills, and it's related to the program. You need some like iPads or Chromebooks or something that falls into like the equipment. Do I have that right, Talayla?
So equipment, since this is a federally funded grant, we'll go with the federal definition of equipment, which is any item that has a per unit cost over $5,000 and a useful lifespan over 1 year. So that can be any kind of technology, that can be some type of specialized equipment, that could be some type of specialized furniture, a STEM card of some kind that had a per unit cost over $5,000. So for the federal definition, anything over 5,000 and a useful lifespan over a year.
Okay. And I guess if it's under 5,000, we would call that materials.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
great.
Yep. Even technology, we would call that a supplier of materials, since we're going with the federal definition.
Awesome. Thank you. Training or professional development. So you can definitely send your staff to a relevant training that will help you execute the grant better. There's a lot that out there that ICfL does all of our trainings for you for free, but we are not the only game in town. So there are other folks you can connect with. Professional services and speakers, those are usually your program presenters that you would bring in. Services or subscriptions during the grant period, and advertising related to the grant. But it has to be supporting the grant. So you can't generally like use the funding to support, come use your library. But if you are doing teen services, you're starting a new teen services program at your library, you could do some advertising that's something like, come to the library for a teen services program every Tuesday at 4 o'clock. So it has to be directly tied to kind of the support of the grant. Non-allowable expenses, food, unless it's part of the program. So we've all done the solar ovens where you need to buy marshmallows and crackers, or you're doing a STEM activity with, again, marshmallows and spaghetti, or you're doing a cooking activity and you need materials so that you have like a learning objective tied to this cooking activity. Then it's fine. The food is considered your supplies or your materials. But if you're just doing a pizza party to get the teens to come into the program, that is not allowable. Check with your friends group. Capital expenditures. Sorry, you can't do any, like, you can't do a building project with your $3,000. Construction, advertising not related to the program or not related to the grant, and promotional items or like souvenir type items. So when it comes to summer, all of the like branded stuff you kind of hand out that's fun, but isn't really related to any of the learning objectives of summer programming, those are not allowable, but books are allowable, and books are always allowable as part of this grant, which is kind of cool because if it makes sense for your grant project, purchasing books for your library's collection could be a way that you can use the grant funds. And finally, your library needs a UEI number. If you have received a grant from the ICfL in the past year, you probably already have one of these. If you don't, we have some quick tutorials on how to request your number. But it's important that we have that number so that we can process your grant funding. So you need to get one. Okay, let's dive into individual grants. So the OST planning grant. So this is the larger out of school time planning grant. Again, this is kind of for system-wide efforts, but if you're a solo library in your district, that's fine. And we want you to engage in some strategic planning activities for youth in your community, which includes creating an asset map. And last year we did a virtual webinar on how to do an asset map in your community. And then we offered one-on-one coaching with our presenter for that training to get folks up to speed on how kind of the ins and outs of creating an asset map. So far, I think that's been a really valuable piece of that grant. So we're going to keep that piece of it. We want you to come up with a plan over the course of the year for how you will keep serving youth in your community. That can be, bullet points, or it can be very detailed. It can be as detailed as you want. But what we want to see is that you're spending the funding and you're spending this year really like investing in your library and in a plan to serve community, your whole community when the funding runs out. And we will also ask that you do the building blocks of quality from the Idaho Out of School Network. Idaho Out of School Network has created these 8 building blocks to help out of school programs continuously improve what they're doing for kids in their communities. There are 8 building blocks. I will be the first to say, I don't think all of them necessarily are the best for libraries, just because many of you don't deal with some of the issues that a traditional out of school time program would deal with, like some of the health and safety regulations and registration things. So we're going to have you do 4 of the building blocks for quality. We're going to ask everybody who gets one of the grants this year to watch a webinar that has not been recorded yet, but will be recorded by our partners at the Utah Education Policy Center. And that webinar is how to use data that you gather and collect, like your library statistics or survey data, how to use it to tell a story. So we will be asking you to collect a little bit of data as part of your grant reporting, and we want to make sure that you think it's useful too. So we're going to ask that everybody who receives a grant this year have that tool built into their grant. And again, the OST planning grant, up to $15,000 or $7,500 if you're a returning library. And that needs to be a library-wide effort. So some key dates with that one: application opens tomorrow. We'll close on September 30th. We need a few weeks to rank the grants and get the money out the door. And the grant period runs from October 23rd, and that actually should be till August 30th, not August 31st. August 31st is a Saturday, and we're just going to say August 30th is the cutoff date for this one. So you have from basically the end of October through the summer to spend the $15,000. We'll ask for an interim report on April 15th, and then final report is due on August 30th. This year, we've been a little bit flexible with receiving some of those reports, but we will be required to report back on all of this funding in mid-September. So there is no wiggle room for reporting this year. We need everybody's reports in on time, August 30th, which is a Friday. And the OST programming grant is up to $3,000. And then these are for individual locations. They can support your existing or your new programs. We will ask that each library that received this grant do one of the ION building blocks. And when I say do a building block, what I mean is we're going to ask you to watch a webinar on the building block, fill out a 1-page kind of assessment of where you're at in terms of what that building block is, and then fill out a one-page plan to improve. So it shouldn't take very much of your time, but the time will be well spent, and it's a good investment of your time. Again, we'll ask you to watch the data webinar. Oh, for this grant, again, we don't have as big of a pool this year, and we will be giving priorities for this one to school libraries. When we received the feedback and that we received everybody's grants reports, the school libraries tended to, the projects that they did tended to align more closely with the intent of the grant. So since the funding source was originally for elementary and secondary school relief, we feel like we feel okay giving to priority to schools for this grant. So if you're a public library, I'm not saying don't apply. There are still plenty of grants available. But I'm just saying that you need to write a really good grant proposal. So key dates. Again, applications August 25th to September 30th. The grant period for this one is October 23rd through May 31st. So we are not running this one into the summer. And your final reports are due on May 31st. Okay, before we move on to summer, does anybody have any questions about the out-of-school time grants?
Jen, there is one question in the chat about the programming grant. So if someone received the programming grant last year, are they also limited to half the grant that they received last year, or are the programming grants all the same?
The programming grants are all the same. So if you received 3,000 last year, you can also apply for 3,000 this year. It's just the larger ones where we're kind of limiting it to make room for some new grant projects. But some of the people who received the larger grants are doing some really stellar work. So we want to make sure they're still supported as much as we can. 3,000 doesn't go as far, so everybody can get their 3,000, up to 3,000. If you don't think you can spend $3,000, and let me tell you, some of you have had a problem spending it, that's fine. Just ask for 2. Okay. So summer grants. So summer strategies. These are up to $20,000. This is a change from last year. Last year, we offered up to $30,000, which was very challenging for libraries to spend just on summer. So we wanted to kind of still give you some beef to this one, but up to 20,000 is the amount. If you received the grant before, you can apply for up to 10,000. These are for publicly funded library systems, and that's just because it was getting too many words on my slide here to say everybody can apply for this one. So school libraries, public libraries. I had a community college that does a summer camp contact me to see if they'd be eligible. And you know what? If a community college library wants to support a summer camp for kids who are in high school or not community college age, but fall in that elementary or secondary school age, we will entertain that grant application as well. Tribal libraries, so summer strategies. Everybody can apply, basically. So this grant is to implement best practices for summer learning. So we're going to ask you to participate in a book study, do a little, ground yourself in some of the research around summer, participate in a kind of other grant that we're part of that is not a monetary grant called Building Equity-Based Summers. And that is a series of discussions where we talk about kind of rethinking summer in terms of equity, but also the power structures behind summer. It's a fascinating discussion series, and it really makes you think about how you're doing summer in your library differently and how you can be more inclusive of your community as you're designing summer services. So it's been a cool experience. We're going to do that one again. If you receive the Summer Strategies grant, there is an expectation that you will have a team from your library participate in that discussion series. So it's not just one person. We need sort of what we call a vertical team, which means we need someone who's sort of at an administrative manager level and somebody who's sort of at a frontline level. Is like we need at least 2 people. If you have more people in your library who can attend, that's great. But a lot of times what happens with these types of things is you'll have the frontliner come to the discussion series and then they're not empowered within their organization to do anything with what they're talking about. So we want to make sure that our groups are equitable in that way too. Anyway, so you've got to do my virtual discussion series if you get this grant. Book study, it'll be a different book this year. I have my eye on a couple, that's TBD. Ask you for you to do the data webinar. And for this grant, we're really going to have you focus on doing a plan for future summer learning. So that when the grant funding goes away, you've learned some lessons, you have some ideas about what you want to do for summer and what impact you want to make. So we're going to ask you to write about that. Some key dates. Again, this grant opens on September 20th, so you have a little while to think about what kind of project you would do or how that would look for your library, or ask me all the questions. It closes on October 25th. The grant period will run from November 15th, which is probably when we can get the funding to you, through, oh, sorry, I didn't change the grant. I didn't change the date on this one either. It will run through August 30th. And the interim report will be due on April 15th, and the final report will be due on August 30th. So everything again is due on August 30th for summer. Okay, summer support is $2,000. And again, if your library is doing any type of summer programming and you're publicly funded, you can apply. This one, for $2,000, we want you to watch a data webinar, and we want you to take what you're already doing or already planning on doing and just amp it up. Reach more people, make it bigger, maybe do a little bit more intentional programming. Hire, if you've got a part-timer that you can throw some extra hours to and the $2,000 is going to cover it, use it for that. But we really want you don't need to reinvent the wheel for this grant. It's merely to support your summer programs, which many of you are already doing such a fantastic job at. Some key dates for this one, we'll have you apply October 15th through November 15th. And we'll get the money out to you pretty early. And the grant period is from December 15th to that should read August 30th. And your final report is due on August 30th. So it's funny, I changed most of the dates, but I just my brain just didn't change the grant period dates. So we give you a long time to spend the money just because I know some of you start buying for summer, like in the winter, which is great. Not all of you do though. So you have a pretty healthy, you have like 7 or 8 months for this grant, but really what we're asking you to do to support is summer programs. So we don't want this grant to support your out of school time programs, but you can start purchasing things for summer a little earlier. And the summer school libraries grant is up to $7,000. School library districts or individual schools can apply for this one, kind of depending on your situation. This is to keep school libraries open during the summer. Jeannie, do you want to talk a little bit about what we mean by open?
Sure. Well, as Jennifer has mentioned a couple of times, we're a pretty rural state, and sometimes kids can't get to the school for many reasons during the summer. They have to cross a busy highway or it's just too far. So keeping your summer school library open doesn't necessarily mean in the actual building. It can mean taking programs outside or into the park or into the community. So don't just think of it in terms of staying in your school library building.
Thanks,
and that's all I have to say about that.
Thanks. So we'll have folks who receive that, or libraries that receive that grant, to also do a data webinar and engage in a book study, because we don't want to just say, hey, do summer, and not give you any support about how to best do summer or what the research says good summer programming is. So we will support you in that way. You can apply for this grant October 15th through November 15th. The grant period is December 15th through August 30th. And the final report is due on August 30th. Okay, beyond the grants this year, you can expect support materials. By that, we mean bookmarks that help you better engage with teens, with kids, with families. So some of you may be familiar with the graphic novels bookmark that we have. So we will get some of those like printed and available for libraries to request. We also have been working on one that supports out of school time in a very specific way that's kind of like related to the grant. I'm not sure what else we will do, but we're thinking about it. We'll do some kits, professional development and books. Honestly, we have a lot of ideas, but if you have ideas for things that your library might need to support learners out of school, so after school, summer, if you have ideas for what that might look like and things you might need that we can purchase on your behalf, let us know. If we can maybe replicate that statewide, or if you have any ideas, just let us know. And by us, I mean myself, Jeannie, or Talayla. There's our contact info. And I'm going to stop sharing. Oh my gosh, it is 40 minutes after. Thank you, everybody, for listening to me talk for 40 minutes. I appreciate it. Now I am here to answer your questions. What questions do you have?
So one question I have is on the OST, you had to do half the grant if you got it last year. Is the summer grant the same way?
For the
school one.
For the school one, it isn't.
Okay. So we still apply for the 7,000 or up to 7,000? Okay.
Yeah. The kind of reasoning for that, if you're interested, is that that isn't based on a specific project. It is funding to mostly just keep your school library open. And that $7,000 mark, I think we hit on that based on data from a previous grant where we kept libraries open, and that was like a sweet spot for that number.
Yeah, I got it last year and I loved it. We had a wonderful summer. So
oh, good.
Yeah, it's a good grant.
Yeah. After the grant period is all over, we do have plans to use all of the data that we're collecting from the reports that you send us and from the stories to create, some sort of storytelling object that helps us maybe secure additional funding for projects like that. Don't know what that would be or where we would get the funding, but our hope is that all of the hard work that libraries around the state are doing this year will lead to opportunities for other funding sources for some of these great projects down the road. So when you're filling out your final reports, just think about that piece too, that what you're writing is an investment into a story that may help with additional funding down the road. So. Any other questions about the grants? Go ahead.
I just wanted to add too, as you're thinking about your project, just think about the intent of the funding. So the intent is really to increase educational time in an out of school or summer setting for those K-12 students. So think about, I think one thing last year that we didn't see as much of is hiring additional staff, bringing in contractors, providing that additional programming time for students or homeschool students. That would be something I'd really encourage people to look at, is where can you increase your educational time, since that's really the intent of the funding at the federal level.
And I mean, each of you knows your community so well, and I would just have you think about the kids in your community before COVID and how they are now. And think about the impact that some of the health mitigation efforts had on them, the social isolation. Think about what you're seeing now and how you can address the needs of kids who have really been impacted by years of, or even months in some cases, of virtual learning. It had a huge impact on some kids. Not having access to trusted adults or peers. I've heard from libraries across the state that they can tell the difference in kids and they see kids really struggling. So think about ways that funding one of your projects might really help address some of the needs of those kids. If you're a public library, maybe talk with your school district to see what the needs are, talk with your school librarians to get a good sense of what they're seeing in the classroom. And if you are a school librarian and you're kind of struggling with maybe how to meet those needs, maybe meet with your public librarian for ideas on programs to do or different ways to implement programs.
Yeah, and being really creative, doing things that your library may not typically do, the types of programs that you may not typically offer, but that do cater to the needs of those youth in your community. We did see some really fun, really creative projects last year that we don't typically see in libraries, but it was really amazing to see how excited the kids got about the programs, and that they were able to provide that increased learning time for them.
I know that I think somebody told me about 60% of Idaho school districts are now at a 4-day school week. So addressing the needs of learners during that Friday when there is no school would definitely be a good use of these grant funds as well. Any other questions, or any of you, those of you who received one of the grants, have anything to share?
So can I just say about the 4-day school week?
Yeah.
Because we've had one for like 12 years now. This funding has made a huge difference in what we're able to offer on those Fridays. And we have just really been able to up our game because of that. And we have seen a lot of those kids that are struggling for one reason or another. And when we can get them to come in, we really have started to see some positive impacts by that programming. So if you're a school district that's just gone to a 4-day week, really there's a lot of potential and a lot of possibilities there. I just wanted to throw that in from experience.
Thanks, Cindy. I want to address Sherry's comment is, what if we cannot continue to grow? What if we feel we've hit our cap? And I think that's an excellent question. And, you know, it's not just the amount of kids you're serving and the amount of programming you're doing and doing more. It's doing a really great job with what you're already doing. So there's not a lot of reason to try to expand programs when you're reaching every kid in your community. Or I work with some libraries where there's just the 10 families in town, and they've got the 10 families and nobody else is going to move to town. That's fine. But think about ways you can invest in yourself, in your staff, and in your resources to make sure that all of those kids are being served in more meaningful ways. Or, you know, I'm just going to plug Sherry's library for doing such a great job with this, but Sherry does a fantastic job at youth voice and choice, and really giving the kids who come into her library agency in terms of what they're learning and what programs they're doing. And then she connects them with resources in a really beautiful way. And I would say for when you're working at that level, just keep going and use the resources to just improve your own practice with your community. But if you don't reach more kids, that's not really the intent, because the intent is that the kid that needs the help the most gets the help. I'm going to just point out one thing, since I have you all here, and some people are going to be viewing the recording, is that one little kind of tricky thing on the final reports that we have for folks is that we have school libraries report out a little differently than public libraries. And that is because of the funding source for this. If it goes to a school or a school district, then we need to gather some specific demographic data that your school district already gathers. It's on the state board's report card for your school. But that is not a piece that we ask public libraries to report out at this point. We do ask public libraries, though, to tell us which schools are in your service area, because that data needs to get linked up somewhere. It's magical. We don't know how it's going to happen, but it will. But just a note that those of you who are from school libraries are going to have slightly different data to report, and that's just because we need it for when we report, we think. I guess one other thing I would say is that take a little bit of extra. We have until September 20th to turn the first set of applications in for the out of school time grants. Or September 30th, sorry. You have some time. Take some time and really make sure that you are making it easy for us to fund your project. So tell us about your community. You all know your community so well. Tell us about who's in your community. Tell us stories about them, about the kids you serve, and tell us your ideas and your dreams for serving the kids in your community. I think if you can do those two things, then it makes our job really hard when we get into the grant ranking meeting. So make my job hard, please.
And if I could just add on to that to make it just a little harder, make it very clear how your idea lines up with the goals of the grant. That is super helpful.
Yeah, I would second that. Make sure that your idea fits with the purpose, the overall purpose of this grant. And also, when you're shooting for the stars, think very realistically about your budget, because as Jennifer already mentioned, we're not going to have very much wiggle room in our grant deadline, our grant period deadline for these grants. So we really want everyone to get all of their funding spent. We have that hard deadline next year for the grant report. And if you end up having to return funds to us, we're just going to have to return those to our funder. So we really want you to be realistic. Think about how much money you can actually spend. If you apply and are awarded the grant and something comes up, like you have staff turnover or your capacity changes, please let us know as soon as possible so we can help you to get a new plan in place to be successful in filling out the grant requirements. So just a slight word of cautious optimism with that.
Does anybody else have any questions about the grants? And I know I made it seem like we have less funding than last year, which is true, but we still have a lot of funding. So don't let that stop you from applying. Especially for the OST grants, I feel like we'll be in a good position. Summer, we'll see. We'll see how that one shakes out. But again, if you have any ideas for not grant related support that you might need, let me know. I would love to hear it. So feel free to email me or Jeannie or Talela if you have questions about applying for the grants or as you're going through your application materials. On the website for the ESSER grants, for each individual grant, it's a lot of text, but that is basically everything that will be in your application and your grant agreement. So a lot of the information that you may need about the purposes of the grant, the goals of the grant are right there on the webpage. And then at the very bottom of each webpage is the application questions. So you can look at those. They're updated now. They're ready to go whenever you like. So feel free to explore all 5 of the grants. Maybe, I don't know. Please look at the web pages I created and copied and pasted into. We will, for the OST grants, when I get in tomorrow, by 8:30, we will have the applications up. So you should be able to start applying by 8:30 tomorrow. I would encourage you to maybe put a little bit of time into your application, and they're not due till September 30th. So, but maybe you've been thinking about it all year and you just have a good idea. That's fine. So you can start applying tomorrow. We'll have that open, and all of the, like I said, all the questions and information about the specific grants are updated on each of the pages. Well, please reach out if you have any questions, and I hope all of you take my money. Please take our money. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Gonna stop recording now.